This is great. From data running to crafting, base building could be Star Citizen's endgame. Listen, base building, land ownership, I think we're going to see a lot of that at CitizenCon coming up. I don't think a lot of it will be readily available anytime soon. We already know about Star Citizen 4.0 being delayed. We watched a video last night with Salty Mike where he was talking about his views in it. I disagreed with the majority of the opinions, but agreed with a few. And then actually Salty Mike stopped in the stream last night and he was giving context to his opinions, which is really interesting. And I just want to see where we're going here, because I think land claims and ownership is the real juice to a sandbox MMO. When you are owning a piece of land in space, that is your ultimate, like, that is the stuff right there. Let's check out what Space Tomato has to say about base building.
What is your end game in a game like Star Citizen? We all might take some time mining, salvaging material, looting locations for valuables, or stealing somebody else's goods. And maybe you just enjoy some racing or touring the verse, or the explorer who's finding those resources for others. But one of the longest running end game goals for many different games across various genres is making a home. And for a long time, that's been barely even a topic when it comes to Star Citizen. But it's undoubtable at this point that base building will be a major part of CitizenCon this year, and along with crafting, a focus of the game post 4.0. Finally, along with an economy, this could be the rhyme and reason many fans of the project have been waiting for to make the game make sense. Today we'll take a look at the basics of base building and how even other players choosing this path could fit into your own game loop of choice. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk.
I think we're seeing a big focus on the economy coming up. I think we're going to have a lot of economy talks because you're seeding the future. When you can actually have a thriving economy and another system to play in, aka Pyro, and you have two systems where you can not only just balance and screw with security and code it correctly, you can also talk about like the dynamics between two systems and trading between two systems and an economy. And I think we're steering ourselves toward the economy right now. I think we're seeing it with all the changes in 3.24 and item banks and physicalized cargo, because now they're trying to steer the game towards physicalized cargo and actual data sets where the server can pull from data sets that are stored basically in your inventories and don't have to be generally produced, graphically generated to reduce the amount of object containers. So that will help, and is a first step towards an economy that's more serious. So it is interesting following this and seeing what they're going to put on CitizenCon when it has to come to like anything economy based. I'm down for it. So we are gearing ourselves up to get into this next phase, which is really exciting for me because as an industrialist and somebody who loves economic gameplay, especially in MMOs, I think we're getting there. I think 3.24 really is the step forward that we needed for the economy, and I think it's the springboard into a future. We're actually going to get more information about what we're getting within the economy. Don't write it off, backspace.
Do you make a habit of cracking rocks in Star Citizen?
It'll do something.
Do you look around for
way
anything other than a couple of different elements when working? The game loop is arguably the most filled out in the game, with components and subcomponents, hand-placeable gadgets, single and multi-crew ship options, ground vehicles, and FPS opportunities with multiple options as to what elements you're taking home. But most mining enthusiasts don't even recommend the gameplay that often. How about you, cargo haulers? You've got 324 finally making the profession more interesting after over half a decade of waiting, but missions are still just text on a screen. And your own commodity trading isn't really driven by anything with purpose.
Yes, right.
Engineers should start to get opportunities to give power and resource management a try in 4.0, but for as complex as ships are, there's something quite special about trying to figure out the balance around running a whole ground operation, like in something like Satisfactory. I could keep going on, but I think you probably get the point. Star Citizen is really lacking a purpose for a lot of the things we're doing in the game. And while we generally look at the economic simulation, Quantum, or Star Sim as the saving grace for that problem, I think base building and crafting are the real endgame solutions this game needs. Obviously, missions and contracts are enough for many players, but the sandbox aspect of this game really needs some more drive to keep people interested long term. Even the aspects of exploration and data running will rely heavily on base building. Resource deposits will be a major part of building infrastructure across the game, encouraging players and groups alike to plop down extractors, refineries, and drills to obtain the most valuable resources and store them or ship them off for sale.
You're going to see more of a move into land-based claims and the ability to make outposts going forward as the ship sale buzz starts to plateau. You know, like these revenues have been ramping up just year after year. They're just beaten. They're beaten every year. They're beating their revenue, their prior year's revenues. You're going to start to see a plateau. Doesn't matter. You're just going to naturally, organically start to see this plateau. At some point, they're going to hit it. When they hit the plateau, they've got to find something additional just to ship sales. They're going to have to. Now, of course, you still have your big ships, and, you know, they might just go wow and bring out like a Kraken and go, here you go, you know, and you're like, oh shit, you know, like, so you still have those moments with ship sales and what hits, right? And you're like, oh shit, you know, the BMM, you know, like, whoa, you know, like they'll still like boom, right? But eventually those revenues are going to plateau. When they plateau and interest starts to decline naturally, organically, and revenues start to go down, I think they'll push land. They're just going to push it in, and you're going to be like, holy shit, and it'll be like the holy grail, and it'll substitute the buzz and the high that you got with the ships, and you'll be like, wait a second, what's happening here, right? And then, boom, you'll get another launch up. You'll get another launch up in revenue after that. Just my speculating.
These locations will need to be regularly updated on the global map database so that players can buy the info from space stations and shops, or at least recorded to be sold off or shared with other player groups. This concept was shared during the discussion around base building in 2017.
Criteria, as well as the seller's insight into that information, which we collectively refer to as knowledge. One of the things that we track for each section of land that you can potentially purchase is the resources present and the quantity. If the land has an abundance of a particular mineral that at that particular point in time is, exceptionally valuable, then that's going to increase, the current value of that land. Knowing that there is, a vast abundance of gold at a particular area, but the information is stale. It's 2 weeks old, it's a month old, it's 6 weeks old. As it gets more out of date, it becomes less and less valuable. And so what this means is that players will routinely have to refresh, the knowledge of a particular area in order to maintain the perceived land value within the game.
And the design behind downloading these maps was further teased at CitizenCon just last year.
It's much more interesting if we can actually take this on the go. So let's download it to our data bank. As you'll notice, we now have the representation of the environment in the upper left corner of our visor. Now, the thing that's really interesting to note at this point is you may encounter rundown settlements, or you might come across a cave that no one else has ever set foot on before. What will happen in this instance is your radar will incrementally update your map, and it will incrementally reveal your environment and save that to your data bank. So this map, what we see in the upper left corner of our visor, is not really just a map. What it really is actually data. It's our radar.
This system could rely on data losing value and even degrading in accuracy if resource deposits regularly shift over time when not exploited.
And this was the reason that Novacork had to shut down telemetry with Dual Universe. Dual Universe, all the information on every planet where everybody did the work. It was voxel oriented, so you could dig around, make your own tunnels. You could do just pretty much anything in dual universe. That was a huge amount of data. Telemetry data is what they call it. And they didn't have the money to support the amount of information that players continually made these tunnels, and it was more information that the system needed to know and update to the servers, and the amount of server space needed kept going up and up and up and up. They could not afford it because they didn't have the player base to support it. So what I'm seeing here with the maps, and I talked about this before, is like you have all this additional telemetric data, and it's a lot. It's going to be a lot of data. It's going to be a lot of data. So one thing that I go to is like, yes, I know they've raised 800 million. Yes, I know they've done this primarily by selling ships. After the fact, how do they continue to fund the additional server space and all the information that's going to be required just in the maps alone? I mean, it's going to be crazy amounts of money that it's going to take to continue to support that amount of detail. So that's something to talk about. That's an interesting conversation to be had.
While this is speculation based on the past talks of CIG, it would be a great source of low-risk, starter-level exploration missions, which require the surveying of planets and moons in whatever system you're in. Finally, the various player-made structures in the game would add into the economic network that provides people across different groups with more places to go for actual reasons. Whether it is to store and ship goods, stop off for supplies and fuel, or maybe even set a new respawn location. Even the actual construction of these bases are going to take a lot of resources that players will have to buy, mine, or salvage on their own.
And also why dynamic server meshing is so goddamn important, because again, you have more object containers being populating in the game, and you have more data that needs to be, substantiated, man. It's crazy.
Only so many outposts and points of interest that could be made for this game by the devs. Player content could help to bring the vast planets and moons in Star Citizen more life. While players can get an apartment,
they cannot give any version of base building. They cannot put out any base building content until they've figured out dynamic server meshing. It would be such an amazing amount of load on the system. It wouldn't be able to handle. It wouldn't be able to handle it without dynamic server meshing. Imagine every one of us having the ability, or those with ships that can actually create stations like the Pioneer, or I think the Galaxy as well, like with particular modules, make outposts. Like imagine all these people just start popping up like additional object containers everywhere. It would be madness. Like they're like, you think the servers are bad now? Holy shit. So, this is definitely dependent upon dynamic server meshing working.
Apartment in the city, a hab on a space station, or just live off of their own ship, building your base can be a lot more fulfilling. And who likes being near people anyways? The game loops in Star Citizen can provide engaging gameplay for those interested in them. But currently, we're missing the motivation to dig deeper into those game loops outside of just making the most money and buying more ships. This obviously makes people focus more on ships as a level of progression rather than the actual gameplay, the reputation, or the location you're getting to that builds more of the game. From exploration to mining to simply just building a place to live, base building offers a great catalog.
Well, of course that the connections, the ships primarily. First off, like it's one of the only things you can go back to that you can kind of depend on in the game. Everything else, the stability is not there. You'll be able to go back in for more than just the ship when you have the stability that you're looking for from the game. Now, we all know this. We've played the game for so long, we get it. The stability is missing. Once we get a level of stability that we're happy with, then yes, then that will be additional to the connections that we have with our ships right now,
Catalyst to get things moving. But how far is Star Citizen looking to go when it comes to player bases? Different games offer a different focus when it comes to base building. Satisfactory is all about efficiency and function, given that's the whole point of the game. Fallout 76 focuses in large part on social spaces and just a general presence. Valheim and No Man's Sky both hit a mid-ground and generally push you towards base building as an end goal for many. Star Citizen seems to lean towards the latter, but as I've described in the first chapter, it's focused heavily on function, efficiency, and purpose. Your base in Star Citizen will consist of a few different types of facilities. You've got your general purpose buildings like ship landing pads, garages for vehicles, freight elevators to store and summon commodities and supplies, and storefronts, where you'll supposedly be able to sell and buy goods, a perk we most commonly associate with the Banu Merchantman and the Drake Kraken Privateer. You've got to have somewhere to sell those valuables you discover. And these are mainly your outward-facing facilities that could see visitors and goods passing through.
Doesn't this make you so excited? You know, this is the thing that makes me so very excited, and it's just so far off from happening. You know, like it's a double-edged sword. Like, you know, on one side it's like, wow, this is like so amazing. On the other side it's like, we are so far away from this right now.
Then you'll have your extractors, your mining drills and pumps that pull the planet's resources into your own collection. This is one of the most interesting parts of base building because it relies on the principle of resource deposits in the ground, like you might see in Starfield. The way these deposits function and shift could have huge impacts on how this whole game works. It'll also be interesting to see how we can finally get the ability to mine these resources with ships like the old Prospector concept art used to show. With all these different buildings comes the groundkeeper's dream: power management and the associated facilities. We've actually seen hints of these all around the newer points of interest in the game: power lines, windmills, and solar panels. But these obviously aren't what will be included in the system that we're going to use to put our bases together. For that, we'll be able to take advantage of different generators and batteries, which can be charged and discharged based on your power needs. This is visible in the upcoming engineering profession in ships coming with 4.0, and will likely require quite a bit more effort for the more complex bases that we build.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that this is just only for ships, and it actually applies to the coding that they've done here for the engineering on ships. It's the same coding they're going to use for station management. So when you know, people got to realize, like, these types of game mechanics can be applied to other areas. This engineering loop right here also applies to anything engineering, not just ships.
Will likely require quite a bit more effort for the more complex bases that we build. But it'll be equally interesting to see how power needs decide where players plant their roots, as wind power, solar power, and likely geothermal power will push you to certain parts of a planet for the best returns.
Right.
And of course, repair is going to be a big part of these, as you do need to maintain these facilities and keep them up to proper working condition. This again factors into the engineer's gameplay. Now, base defenses. Likely an anxiety-inducing part of this process for players in a game where you can already lose all your loot in the blink of an eye. The good news is you have choices. Fully protected locations in proximity to the UEE territory mean your base is essentially invulnerable.
And yet your resources are going to be completely valueless. So if you want the protection, which is understandable, then I would highly recommend the lawless base systems, but realize your resources are going to be absolutely shit. You will get that safety and security, so you can use those as like your headquarters. I would highly recommend organizations use like law-based systems for safety and collecting your wealth. Like all your wealth and your power and everything should be headquartered in a law-based system, unless you're just like crazy like me and you're like, fuck it, and you want to go into the lawless territories and you want to deal with the chaos and you want to throw caution to the wind, and you're just that type of dude like me, and you're dangerous and you're willing to lose it all, right? You want to fight for it. You know, I'm that type of dude, right? So I'll probably be more lawless based. But in the lawless based systems, you're going to get maximum profit because you're taking on the risk. So for those people that actually have land-based claims in lawless areas, I would tell you this, though. Be very careful if you have a land claim that you're claiming in a lawless based system, because you're going to be on high alert 24/7, and you're going to need a certain around the clock 24/7. You're going to need a certain amount of people in your organization. We're talking in the higher hundreds to maybe even lower thousands. Otherwise, I'd be very careful of lawless-based bases, at least on moons and planets. However, with the caveat of if they're asteroid bases, right? Because we just learned about asteroid bases. And now if you can find yourself like a cool little lawless asteroid base that's out of the way, then there you go. That's your answer for smaller organizations right there. That's what I'd suggest. If you're a smaller organization and you want to try the lawless area, then definitely the asteroid belts and get yourself a proper pirate asteroid base, you know?
You'll never have to worry about losing your things, as hardcore impenetrable defenses and quick spawn AI defenses will keep it safe. This means you'll have to pay higher taxes for upkeep and won't have access to the great resources though, as you're settling down in basically the suburbs of the UEE, relatively speaking. Low security locations may be a system like Nyx, the third star system we'll be seeing, where the UEE isn't active, but there are some factions that will look out for you to try and keep the peace. With some upkeep and taxation still required for the player, it will be less safe but still defended, and being closer to the frontier means more valuable resource deposits will be available to you. Finally, the absolutely most remote locations will give you no security, leaving your base up to the whims of whatever defenses you set up and maintain. This means you're free of the evil big man and able to keep everything you exploit. No taxes, but your base will be very vulnerable. These bases will likely be very small-time operations that can stay under the radar, or org-based facilities that can be monitored around the clock. And while we assume this is all based on a star system basis, it is possible that a system like Pyro might give you low security closer to factions and no security further out away from where they have control. We still have to wait and hear more about that later. Ultimately though, there are a lot of questions that linger around this part of base building. We just don't know about how server meshing and the different shards will be on and the defenses involved will work, but we'll likely hear more about that at CitizenCon this year. Oh, also, maybe we'll hear more about the possibility of you being able to build these bases in space as well, as player-owned space stations or maybe asteroid bases are a concept that they've talked about, but haven't necessarily been confirmed yet. From the process of choosing your location by surveying the planet to building out buildings through fabrication and manufacturing using any tier of the vehicles that will give you access to different sized buildings, on to decorating your interior with furnishings and trophies you've brought home, and finally defining a reason for your base with additional buildings. This comes off as an incredibly applied and varied option for gameplay. And with crafting relying on blueprints that can be physically traded and used for additional manufacturing for any item in the game, from ammo to ships, this whole segment of the game feels like the ideal endgame goal for the sandbox players in Star Citizen.
Yes, Pyro's going to have more.
With server meshing finally entering the game in 4.0, we see the introduction of a long-term goal that was laid out all the way back in 2016. With that, base building naturally makes sense as the next major milestone to shoot for in order to hype players and define some sort of direction for the game. Missions and contracts are always an option, but base building and crafting will likely be a major focus going forward as an end goal for many players. Thank you for watching this Tomato Talk. You recently told me in a
like look at that. He did a poll, 47% base building and homesteading, right? It's like, wow, it's a big deal. Land claims, land ownership, it's always been a big deal. It's a big deal in any sandbox. It's in any MMO. It's primarily the #1 factor, that and exploration. So cool video. I think we're not going to really see an iteration of this hit till after dynamic server meshing is what we need it to be. I think if they did it before they nailed down dynamic server meshing, it might be a mistake. And I would prefer them actually fleshing out an economy before they implement actually any version of homesteading or base building. But we'll see. We'll see how they play it. And I'm really curious to see what they're going to say about it at CitizenCon. You know they will. But I'm more curious to hear what they have to say about the economy. That's how important I think the economy is. So very cool video, Space Tomato. And let us get back to the live show.